Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome back to another edition of BOA The Revival. I'm extremely excited about tonight's show, folks. I'm going to try and contain my excitement as we get going here. I feel like I'm sitting down at the dinner table about to enjoy a 5-course meal at a very fine restaurant. Like I am about to dive into just a feast of information and insights because our guest tonight is Darren Shaefer. He is the host of the podcast, The Cooper Vortex, which is all about the DB Cooper case. And as I said to Darren when we were setting up the show, stunningly, as you all who listen to Binnall of America know, we've been around for a very long time, almost 20 years. We've never done a dedicated DB Cooper episode on BOA, and it's one of my favorite cases. It's really one of my favorite American mysteries. And you may not know this, Darren, but the listeners know I write for Coast to Coast AM, so I'm always covering the DB Cooper. It's like one of my bailiwicks or whatever you call it, but it's one of my favorite stories. And anytime there's something new happens with DB Cooper, I'm always covering it. So I'm really well versed in the case, but we've never explored it on Binnall America. So as I said, it's a huge story and there's so many facets to it, and we're going to try to get into as many of them as we can tonight here with Darren. So, Darren, welcome to Binnall of America. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure, man. It's my pleasure. I'm not sure how we crossed paths originally because we do follow each other on Twitter, but I'm like, how did I meet the Cooper Vortex guy in the first place? But it's a serendipitous thing because it popped into my head as I was putting together guests here for September, and I was like, it's time to do DB Cooper finally. So when we start out on the show with a new guest all the time, it's the bio, the background. Who is Darren Shaefer, and how did you get involved in all this? How did you, decide to become, create the Cooper Vortex?
Well, a bunch of things happened at the same time. So I grew up in Woodland, Washington, which would have been just sort of right next to DB Cooper's proposed drop zone, sort of the closest city to that. I remember watching Unsolved Mysteries with my sister when I was a kid and hearing about that. The Portland International Airport. I was like, Portland, that's right there. And Seattle, that's right there too. And then it's like you jumped out over Ariel or Amboy, and we're like, that's right over there. That's like right in our backyard. That's so crazy. This is a local story. This is amazing. But I was a child. I continued to live in Woodland. There was a bar close by to us, the Ariel store, which is unfortunately closed now. They used to do this DB Cooper Days, which it was either the Friday or the Saturday after Thanksgiving, where they would have this big DB Cooper themed party. And I attended that a couple of times, and I wasn't truly like in the vortex yet, but just sort of a fan of DB Cooper. And then we moved from Washington to Idaho, my wife and I, and around that time, my wife bought me this book, Skyjack by Jeffrey Gray, about the DB Cooper case.
Yeah.
And I read that book, and it led me to a different book, so I had to buy that one too, because I was like, damn, there's so much more to this story than I know. And then at that same time, I had started this job where I work completely alone. So nice. I listened to podcasts for 40 to 60 hours a week. And I had sort of fallen into the DB Cooper vortex, which they call it a vortex in the community because they say once you get sucked in, you cannot escape.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that used in a bunch of places. Yeah, okay, yeah, all right, yeah.
Hilariously, I'll get to that. But so what I'm going to do now is I'm like, I got to find more DB Cooper content. So I search on Apple Podcast, and this is like 2015-ish. Mm-hmm. And I searched on Apple Podcasts DB Cooper. And there were maybe 25 different shows that had done one episode on DB Cooper.
Right.
And they were all exactly the same. It was 2 or 3 hosts. They would discuss the hijacking for about 20 minutes. Then they would spend 15 minutes going over 3 different suspects.
Yeah.
And then the last 5 minutes, the 3 hosts would decide who they thought was most likely DB Cooper. And then they solved that case on to the next show. And by this point, I had already read at least 3 books. I was reading on the online forums. And so I had like such a higher level knowledge than these podcasts that I found it frustrating.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear long form interviews with the people that wrote these books on DB Cooper I'm reading. I wanted to hear long form interviews with these people that are arguing about it online all day long. I wanted to hear that stuff. I wanted to hear the nitty gritty and the details. Let's debate the flight path and all this crazy inside stuff. And I just wasn't getting it.
Yeah.
And so I had listened to a couple other smaller independent podcasts. Shout out to Naked Mormonism, which is kind of my inspiration. And listening to that, there's this guy, Bryce Blankenagel, and he, while I listened to that show, he sort of went from, I want to say he was driving an interstate battery truck. Went from doing that to being a professional podcaster. And he wasn't getting rich. He was probably just getting by.
Yeah.
But I thought if this guy can do such a niche show about Mormonism that he could make a living off of it, then maybe I could create this DB Cooper show that I wanted to listen to.
Right.
So I made a plan. I emailed 5 people who I most wanted to talk to about DB Cooper and asked them if they would be on my show that doesn't exist. And I told myself if 2 out of those 5 people say yes, then I will do the show. And right away, all 5 of them said yes.
That's awesome.
Those are my first 5 episodes. But it was sort of shocking, like, okay, now I actually have to create this show. I actually have to do this. And I have no idea how to do that.
It's exciting, though. Yeah. I've joked with people when you first start out. It's like, oh, wow, people, they want more. They want more. This is awesome. They want more. And then after a while, it's like, oh, shit, they want more. It's like,
yes,
oh,
exactly.
no, this is crazy.
Because when I started it, I thought, I'm going to do this for maybe 6 months to a year. I'm going to do about 20 episodes. Because how much can you talk about DB Cooper, right? There's just not that much. And then I'll be done with it. I'll move on. That's sort of my personality. I get obsessed with something, and then it's not enough to be a fan. I have to be the king of whatever that is. And so I thought this is going to be brief. I'll get to the bottom of this. There's not much that could be done, and I'm going to move on. And here we are 6 years later, and I'm still doing the show. I'm deep as hell into DB Cooper, and sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it, but mostly I love it.
I can totally sympathize. I totally get that. Well, it's really amazing. I'm completely blown away by the Cooper case in a lot of ways. I suppose I'm loath to do this, but you almost have to, because people who are listening who have not heard of the case, let's give them the thumbnail on what went down with the DB Cooper case. So you're the expert. I could do a super basic bad rundown. Like I'm already getting the year wrong. I have to look on the thing.
All right, I'm totally prepared to do this.
Yeah, exactly. You're. I'm sure. Yeah, this isn't your first rodeo. So give the Binnall of America listeners the thumbnail on the DB Cooper case, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. It all goes down.
November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a middle-aged man wearing a dark brown business suit with a trench coat or overcoat walks to the front counter at the Portland International Airport. He purchases a one-way ticket to Seattle. The cost of that ticket with tax is $20. He pays for the ticket in cash. The only identification required in 1971 to board a plane was the gate agent asked him his name, and he gave his name as Cooper, Dan Cooper. And then the gate agent wrote the name on the ticket. That was the only identification you needed in 1971. He's one of the last to board the plane. That's to take off at 2:50. He boards via the aft stairs and sits in the back of the plane. So if you're thinking he's one of the last to board, everyone would look at him as he walked by. He boarded from the back of the plane and sat in the back. So he didn't walk by anyone. Just as the plane is taking off, he hands a stewardess a note. She hilariously assumes it's just another businessman hitting on her. So she puts the note in her purse without looking at it. Cooper notices this and gets her attention again and says, "Excuse me, miss, you better have a look at that note. I have a bomb." He is now hijacking this plane. He has a bomb in his briefcase. And he would like $200,000 and 2 sets of parachutes, 2 fronts and 2 backs, or 2 mains and reserves. And he would like that ready before they land in Seattle. The airline agrees to his demands. They have to end up circling the airport in Seattle for a little bit. The pilots tell the passengers that there's a mechanical issue and they have to circle and burn off some fuel for a second. Their 50-minute flight ends up taking about 2.5 hours. They land in Seattle. The passengers are let off the plane. Cooper gets his $200,000. And here's where things get really interesting. So Cooper wants to be flown to Mexico City, but more important than where he wants to go, he tells the pilots how to fly the plane. He wants the plane to remain depressurized. He wants the landing gear to remain down. He wants the flaps set to 15 degrees, and he wants to take off with the aft stairs down. The pilots are unsure if the plane can even fly with the aft stairs down, nevertheless take off with it down. So they call in air traffic control. Air traffic control has no idea if that plane can fly with the aft stairs down. They're like perusing manuals in there and doing whatnot. And so they call Boeing and they're like, "Hey, can this plane fly with the aft stairs down?" And Boeing says, "Yes, it can. We've tested it. It can fly with the aft stairs down. It's not a problem." And so the pilots still refuse to take off with the aft stairs down. And Cooper argues with them for a second. The pilots said it was unsafe because a plane full of fuel and you have these stairs and maybe they're sparking and who knows what could happen.
Right.
It's not something they do all the time, and they're very concerned about safety. Cooper, interestingly, disagrees with their assessment, but tells them he'll lower the stairs in the air. And so with the configuration that he requested, the pilots said they don't have enough fuel to go to Mexico City. They have to do a refueling stop. There's some negotiation on which city. They agree to a refueling stop in Reno. The plane takes off from Seattle at 7:50. It's completely dark in the Pacific Northwest at that time of year by 5 o'clock. I think I looked it up, and on November 24th, 1971, I want to say sunset is like 4:45. So it's dark by 7:50. Plus it's overcast with a little bit of rain and 45 degrees out. Plane takes off at 7:50. It lands in Reno just before 10 o'clock, and Cooper is not on board. The only guess they have as to when Cooper jumped from the plane is in between 8:11 and 8:14, depending on the account or the transcript you're reading. The pilots said they experienced what they called a pressure bump, which they could feel in the cabin. And also there was a little bit of movement that they had to actually make a correction for in flying the plane. And so they theorized this is when Cooper jumped. So to prove this, they took the exact same plane, and I'm not talking about the same make and model. They took the plane that Cooper jumped out of, flew it over the Pacific Ocean, and pushed a 200-pound sled out of the back to see if it would recreate that pressure bump that the pilots felt. And they believed that it did. So that's where we get DB Cooper's drop zone, somewhere over Ariel, Amboy, Yakult, Battleground, Orchards.
All right. And the rest is true crime history in a way.
The rest is true crime history. DB Cooper only exists for 5 hours. He shows up just before the flights to take off at 2:50, and he's completely gone when they land at 10 p.m. Most likely he's gone by 8:30. So there is no story before this hijacking. There's no story after. He asked for the notes that he sent to the stewardess. He got those back. One of my favorite facts about this case is that Tina Mucklow, the stewardess that he had sit next to him, she lit his cigarettes for him, which I just love that fact about the story. And one of his matchbooks that he gave her, she used the last match in that matchbook, and he asked for that matchbook back.
Oh, wow.
The only thing he left on the plane was he had a clip-on tie he was wearing. He left that on the plane, maybe on purpose or maybe by mistake. And then in 1980, the only evidence we have really post-skyjacking is there's an 8-year-old boy on the shores of the Columbia River on what's called Tina Bar, and they're going to make a little campfire. This 8-year-old boy brushes some sand aside with his arm and uncovers a pile of garbage. His dad picks it up, and he couldn't really make it out, and then he sort of looks at it again, and it's a bundled stack of $20 bills. And just like you or I would, he took it home and got ready to spend them. But the money was too badly deteriorated, and one of his friends was like, dude, that could be D.B. Cooper's money. You should call the FBI. And so since the money was really too deteriorated to even separate or spend, they called the FBI, and the serial numbers matched the serial numbers from the D.B. Cooper hijacking.
Yeah. Well, what's remarkable to me, there's a whole bunch of elements, obviously. This case is so richly detailed, and all the details, I'm sure, as you know, have been poured over by researchers fastidiously. One of the remarkable things to me is obviously he didn't have the foresight, but he got incredibly lucky because he took back all that stuff, but he left these cigarette butts, which have since tragically been lost, somewhere in the mix.
Not lost.
What do you mean not lost? Destroyed? What happened?
Destroyed. So the FBI files on the Cooper case are out. So the FBI suspended their investigation in 2016. Mm-hmm. The case is not closed, but the FBI said we are not going to put any more resources into this case. If you find a ticket or a parachute, give us a call, but we are not actively investigating this case anymore. I believe it was Mark Zaid, if I'm saying his name correctly, the attorney who ended up suing to get the FBI files on the case released. They've been being released now for like 10 years. It's one lump at a time. But I have personally seen, and many others in the community have seen, the memo regarding the cigarette butts. And it basically says, hey, here's these cigarette butts from D.B. Cooper. There was 8 cigarette butts, 7 of them he smoked, and 1 the stewardess smoked. And it was like the exact memo said, hey, see if you can pull any prints off these. If you can't, then throw them away.
Oh, my God. Yeah. So lost, technically, but yeah. yeah.
That's intentionally destroyed.
You would get the DNA. They would be able to get the DNA right out of the cigarette, I'm sure.
There's one other avenue for DNA. So they pulled a hair off the seat he was sitting in that they believed was his. And so they have this one hair on a hair slide. And because we have the FBI files now, we can look at what happened to this and how they were investigating the case. And so, Tim, you have this hair slide of this insane criminal. This could solve the case. This is a crazy piece of evidence. I'm at an office somewhere else, and I'm like, I give you a call. Hey, Tim, I have this one hair from this guy. I think he may be a Cooper suspect, but I'm not sure. Let's take a look at it. You would say, okay, mail me your hair, and I'll compare it.
Yeah.
But that's not what the FBI did. The FBI said, okay, I'll mail you the slide.
Oh, my God.
Yes. And so I want to say the last, as far as we've seen in the files so far, the last place it was like a FBI office, I want to say in like Jackson, Mississippi or something like that.
Oh,
but that hair slide is believed to be lost now, not destroyed. But here's the other caveat to that. So if we could find that hair slide today, more than likely, the glue they used to affix the hair to that slide in 71, by this point in time, would have ruined any chance to recover DNA.
Wow.
So even if we found this magical hair slide, it's too late.
That's insane. That's crazy. This guy, like, he really got lucked out in a lot of ways by just this year, the time frame and everything else.
And the novelty of the crime. He was really the first one. There were hijackings going on at the time. That was not rare. But all those other hijackings were take me to Cuba. It was this politically motivated thing.
Yeah, okay.
It wasn't, I give me a bunch of money and then I'm going to jump out of the plane.
Yeah, it was I think that's why people are, still so enamored with the case. It's become even bigger in recent years, as I'm sure you know. Like when I got started in all this, it was kind of like a novelty story, but it wasn't like, it's become a cottage industry now. It's become a whole subculture, as you were saying, of just centered around DB Cooper. It's really awesome. It's really amazing. That's a big reason why I want to talk to you, because I'm fascinated by these subcultures that grow up around different mysteries. And the DB Cooper one has just gotten so big in recent years. It really has taken on DB Cooper's become like this folk legend, more so than certainly people. He's not like hated or anything. It's weird. It's like he got away with it. People kind of love him. Yeah.
If I could go back in time to right before I started this podcast, I've said this on my show a couple of times, but when I got into this in like 14, 15, I was buying all these old rare books about DB Cooper. Like I bought The Real McCoy. I paid less than $10 for that. I bought Tusaw's book. I paid probably $5 for that. Himmelsbach's book. I paid nothing for that. And they were widely available. If I could go back in time, I would tell myself, Darren, buy all of these super rare 1980s DB Cooper books, because once you start the show and you're talking about them all the time, other people want to buy them, and now they're prohibitively expensive for some people.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the real McCoy has got to be like $55, $60.
Oh my God.
And there's this one book in the DB Cooper community called Ha Ha Ha.
Yeah.
Written by DB Cooper. And there's a long storied story behind that. And that book I've seen trade for like close to $500.
Wow.
And one of my friends in the community just gave it to me years ago because there was no value to it then.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah, that's what kind of blew me away when I started digging into your work and everything. And I'm like, this is like, I'm sure you're on there too. There's like a DB Cooper Facebook page. It's like the page. I don't know which one it is. It's like, but
I'm well aware of it.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I first was like, okay, this is a thriving community. This is not like, I did a little stint sort of like trying to understand the flat earth people. And now that's like a dying community. So it's like the comparison between the two. It's like, no, this community is like thriving. This is really amazing what's going on in the DB Cooper research world. But to circle back a little bit to the case, how many people would you say interacted with this guy on the plane? Tina Mucklow was like she's the stewardess who hung out with him essentially like the whole time. But how many other people kind of interacted with this guy?
The two other stewardess, Florence Schaffner, he was the one who he handed her the note. And I think it's really interesting because once she reads the note, she sort of loses it, understandably, that she's in this situation. And Tina very bravely steps up and she's like, hey, don't worry about this. I got it. I'll deal with this guy. And then she handles the situation from then on. The other stewardess, Alice Hancock, would have got a look at him. And then, hilariously, one of the only passengers, maybe the only passenger that got a real good look at him, was Bill Mitchell, a college student who was flying back home for Thanksgiving, was curious why the hot young stewardess was giving so much attention to what he described, quote, as this geeky old guy. And so he was just like puzzled by this. He's 20, Tina's 22, and she's real good looking gal. And so he's just looking over like, why not me? Like, why that guy? This doesn't make sense. And so he got to look at him and really thought about it for a second, whereas everyone else he was just so average looking and dressed like everyone else that no one really noticed him.
Yeah, and another aspect of this case, which is just sort of the throwback aspect, kind of like we were talking about, like this. If this happened in 2024, it would be solved. Like you would, because what's remarkable is we only really have we only have the drawings. We only have the drawings, and who knows how on the nose they really might be. That's like
and they're
the
different.
Only thing. Yeah, they're not all the same. Yeah, it's really remarkable. There's no video of any of this stuff.
No, he was able to slip through. If I went to hijack a plane today, they would have my credit card information. They would have my real name. They have a picture of my driver's license. They have 900 videos of me going through the airport.
Yeah,
there is no
really
mystery.
Yeah, just amazing, like time capsule sort of look at what life was like back then. Now, this is a really off the wall. I think I asked Drew Hurst-Beeson about this last year when we briefly delved into the DB Cooper story, because this was the one sort of theory I had heard recently that I was like, what? Where it's like the theory that this was all orchestrated by the flight crew, and that there was no DB Cooper, and it was all like an inside job. I'm sure you've heard this theory bandied about, right?
I've heard it a million times. So if you watch one DB Cooper documentary, or you read one book, or you saw one History Channel special, there are two theories that newcomers have that they think are brilliant new novel ideas. And it's always one of these two. And they always come to the group like, hey, have you guys thought of this? And one of them is that Cooper never existed and the flight crew was in on it. It's just 1,000,000% not true. That flight crew most likely did not know they were working together until that morning. So that would be something very difficult to plan.
Yeah.
Also, I've spoken to a ton of people that worked for the airlines as stewardesses and as pilots in the 60s and 70s, and they all say the exact same thing. They loved their job. It was glamorous, especially for like a 22-year-old gal to be flying around the world. And it was an honorable, wanted, glamorous job. It wasn't like, geez, I have to work for the airline. This sucks. It was a coveted position, and they all loved their jobs. And now we're going to whack up $200,000 5 ways, 6 ways, 7 ways. It just doesn't make any sense at all. Plus, a bunch of people saw Cooper. You had passenger Bill Mitchell. We'll exclude flight crew. You also had the gate agent, Dennis Lindsay, who sold him his ticket.
Yeah.
And then you also had people at the airport who remember seeing him, but he wasn't interesting enough to remember, and they described him as sort of standing and looking out the window because it was raining, which it's not unusual for him to be standing and looking out the window at an airport. And is he doing that to hide his identity? Probably, if this is as well planned out as it seems to be. The other theory that people come to, which is even more ridiculous, is that Cooper never jumped from the plane. He hid on the plane somehow and then casually walked off the plane in Reno after everyone bounced. First reason that's completely ridiculous is if you've ever been on an airplane, there's not a bunch of extra space they're not using.
Right.
They're using every available inch of that aluminum tube. The second reason, as soon as the plane lands, the FBI and the police are waiting on the ground, of course, and the plane is immediately searched by dogs. Which, another hilarious story in the Cooper case is Cooper knew that when they landed in Seattle, that was the end of that shift for that flight crew. How he knew that, I don't know, but he knew that. And so he knew he was taking these folks for a longer ride and a longer workday than they had originally planned. So as part of his demands on the ground in Seattle, he asked that meals for the flight crew be brought onto the plane.
Oh.
And so when the plane is searched with dogs, the flight crew never ate that food. And so when the dogs are brought on the plane to search the plane, they ate that meal.
That's awesome. Yeah, I never even dawned on me to consider that, the second theory, until you mentioned it. And it's like, okay, I can kind of see how someone might put that forward, but it's like, it's so ridiculous. Where the fuck are you going to hide in a plane when the FBI are just immediately going to storm the plane? You can't possibly hide in a way that they wouldn't find you in the plane. So
yeah, in a way that a dog wouldn't find you.
Yeah, exactly. Have they ever? I'm going to do a deep cut in a minute here, or going into a deep cut. There was a character they described him as like a cowboy who had sort of like interaction with Cooper. He came up to the back. I'm sure you'll clean up this version of what I'm saying, but he came to the back. He was asking about the mechanical problems or whatever, and Cooper's like, "Hey, man, sit down." And I think the college kid might have been the one who kind of like settled it down or something. I don't know, but you know what I'm talking about. There was a character, a cowboy, who's is he still a mystery today, right? Like no one knows who this guy was.
Well, we're pretty sure who the guy was based on the flight manifest. So I think the plane originally took off. Missoula might have been the first stop. So there's some Montana boys on that plane, and I'm not sure if it's 100% verified. There's some talk in the FBI files, but it's like the most extreme version of the telephone game.
Yeah.
So, but the story goes that this cowboy guy, after a few drinks, he's annoyed that there's still this mechanical thing. And as a cowboy, as a hands-on farmer guy, I assume he probably stood up and like, tell me what the problem is, because I want to know. You can't just say mechanical problems for this. Tell me what it is. And he gets agitated and stands up. And when he stands up, Cooper from the back stands up and tells him to sit down.
Oh.
And apparently he does. I'm not sure how much of that story is true. I like it.
Yeah,
but
that's cool.
I'm not sure exactly how much of that story is true. But it's another thing. You know, the passengers didn't know the plane was being hijacked until they got off the plane. And Cooper is so famously calm, cool, and collected. And this is like an example of his plan not going well. Here's this guy getting agitated. And even in this situation, he's able to control it and calm it down. And even if he has to stand up, be like, bro, sit down. All right, we're fine. And just maybe his tone of voice or his demeanor. The other guy was like, okay, fine. We're all on here together. Whatever.
Right. Yeah. Could have gone completely sideways at that point. So you never know. Do you think now I was going to go in one direction. I got a million things I want to talk about here. So one thing that always like fascinates me and confounds me in a way is there is a considerable school of thought that he didn't survive the jump. And it's like, I just find that so hard to believe. To me, when I hear people say, oh, who are in the he died camp, I'm just like, how? I just don't buy it. For some reason, maybe I just romanticize the case. And it's like, I want him to have gotten away with this. And the money and everything makes you think that he probably survived the jump. But there is a serious school of thought that he died. I mean, I hear that all the time.
I would say there is equal evidence to support that he survived the jump and he died in the jump because there is no evidence of either one. So, but what I will say, the lack of evidence for him dying in the jump sort of, in my opinion, leans towards he survived it. So you have a couple different things here. So Martin Andrade wrote this great book, Finding D.B. Cooper, Chasing the Last Lead. And one of the most important things in that book, in my opinion, is he compares D.B. Cooper's survivability to World War II ejections in Europe.
Interesting.
And so World War II ejections in Europe, you're talking most of those are planes that have a terrible mechanical failure or their wing was blown off or the ass end of the plane is completely gone. And they could be jumping from spiraling, downfalling planes in the worst situation at night in who knows what weather. And he found they had a 97% survival rate. And then looking at that deeper, as many as like 2% could have been dead before they hit the ground. So that even leans more towards the survivability rate. Parachutes work. So if DB Cooper jumps out of that airplane and pulls his ripcord and gets tangled up in trees and dies, or he had too much weight on him for the size of the parachute that he had in improper training, and landing at night, he couldn't judge the distance between his feet and the ground, and a terrible impact and his legs break. In both of those scenarios, he is found as soon as the sun comes up.
Yeah.
Because you have a giant open parachute somewhere and a hurt man or a dead man. He's found immediately. The only way you could support DB Cooper died in the jump is if he is a no pull, which is extremely rare, which seems like he probably had some parachute experience. So he's a no pull and then goes into the ground or into some body of water and is magically never found.
Right.
And the area he's believed to be jumped, a lot of times people will talk about it being the wilderness and being remote, and maybe he burned the money to survive. That's all foolish. I grew up in that area. Even in the most remote parts of what would be his drop zone, it's filled with houses and businesses and roads and railroad tracks and creeks. It's probably 50% wooded, 50% farmland.
Yeah.
If you dropped me in that area at night right now randomly, I would have no problem getting out of there. And I'm not a survivalist or a badass. I'm just a regular guy who would walk to a road or a creek or a railroad track and then follow that. And it's not like a multi-day journey. You could be anywhere in Cooper's proposed drop zone. He can be out of there in just a few hours. And the police didn't know where to look for him until 40 hours later.
Oh, wow. 40. Oh, wow. It was
40 hours because they had to figure out
where he jumped. Yeah.
Even though they thought it could be this pressure bump situation, that's still a really wide area because you don't know, does he pull his parachute as soon as he exits the plane, in which case he would drift for a long ways? Or does he free fall for a while and pull at the last minute and then he didn't drift as far? Yeah. And then we also have, it could be anywhere between like a 2-minute and 7-minute stretch of time. The plane's going 200 miles an hour. In 7 minutes, you cover a lot of ground.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So he had plenty of time to get away and the presence of the money, I guess there's only two options that he left. He buried it there. Maybe somebody associated with him buried it there or like it just somehow landed. Right. And to me, the part where like it just landed doesn't really, I don't know. I feel like it had to have been put there somehow, but I don't know.
The money that was found?
Yeah.
Well, the money that's found is so interesting. I asked this question on my show, like, how did the money get to Tina Barr? And I've had several guests say that they wish the money was never found. Why? Because it doesn't answer a single question. It only adds so many more questions. So
that is what makes this story, it's one of the ingredients to a great mystery, and there's a lot of them in the world of the paranormal and whatever you call this, American high strangeness or something. But it's like, that's one of my favorite aspects of this stuff. Something new will come along and it's like, that doesn't help at all. It makes things worse. So yeah, go on. I'm loving this. Yeah. Go on.
It made it so much worse. So the money's found in February of 1980. And it's really the first thing that's found in the Cooper case where they're like, well, this is from Cooper. This is legit. This is a lead. We're going to go somewhere with this. So they dig up the entire beach to see if they can find anything else. And nothing else is found. There's some debate on if there are shards of money found around there. I don't really care about that because it's probably from the deteriorated $20 bills. If you look them up online, you'll see, the whole outsides of the bills, it was 3 stacks of $120 bills. So it would be about $6,000. And the whole outside of that bundle is completely deteriorated. There's maybe 50% of the bill left on the best quality bill. You can actually buy a fraction, like a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch size chunk of a DB Cooper bill, of a DB Cooper $20 bill, and you're going to pay hundreds of dollars for that.
Yeah,
hundreds of dollars for that. I would love to have one. I would love to have one.
Yeah. I wrote about, they had a recent auction earlier this year of one like fragment, and it was like for quite a few $100s. Quite a, I want to say it was like in the thousands maybe that it sold for.
I want to say the best bill sold for just under $10,000, and it's like
crazy.
All the outside of the edge bill is gone. It's not a square shape anymore. It's nuts. But to the Tina Bar money, they dig this thing up. They don't find anything. But more important than they didn't find anything else was the location of the find doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So if you look at the official FBI flight path that was done by the SAGE radar system, which we installed to protect ourselves against the Russians during the Cold War, it was the most advanced radar system we had. And we were using that to track Cooper's plane. And so there is some debate in the community of where the flight path was. I trust the FBI flight path on this because it was put together by the Air Force. And so Tina Bar is like 15 miles west of that flight path. And if Cooper jumps out of that plane, the wind was blowing east, so he is going to drift east of that flight path.
Yeah.
Then you have where it shows up on Tina Bar on the shore of the Columbia River. So then it's like, you have to explain how the money got there. And Tom Kay took a look at one of these $20 bills to see what was on it and discovered a series of diatoms from the Columbia River. Now, I am not an expert on diatoms by any means. I'm probably going to butcher this badly.
Yeah, I don't even know what a fucking diatom is. So I'm going to assume
these little
like
microscopic, glass type things that are in the water. You can't see them. Diatomaceous earth is made out of like a bunch of trillions of dead diatoms.
Okay.
But in looking at these diatoms are seasonal. And the diatoms on the bills came from spring and summer. And so that's interesting because Cooper jumped in fall or late fall, early winter. And so if he lands in the Columbia, then we should have seen diatoms from the fall and winter, and then maybe even the spring and summer on the bills. But we only see spring and summer. So that tells us that this money only got wet during that time period, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
So not only is it in a place that doesn't make sense, when we tried to explain it by, maybe it got in the Columbia, or maybe it got in this river that fed to the Columbia, or this creek that fed to the Columbia and the Columbia moved it, or a dredge. Now all of that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so now what do you have? It's like, well, human intervention. But even that doesn't make sense, because why would you put it there? If you wanted to put it somewhere it would be found, maybe you would go to your local park and put it in a sandbox or next to the playground, or somewhere where somebody is going to be disturbing that earth.
Yeah.
Not necessarily sort of a rare, unused private beach that was very rarely frequented by fishermen.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it makes me wonder, too, if this money somehow got from DB Cooper to someone else, and then that other person was like, I can't keep this money. This is this is serious. Something serious happened where this guy gave me the $6,000. I got to get rid of it. And maybe they put it there. So I feel like there's some other, maybe not necessarily that, but I feel like there's an element to the story that we don't know.
Well, that becomes more plausible too, because when Cooper's on the plane and he gets his $200,000, he starts looking through it, and the stewardess described him as being excited. And it's like one of the only times he really showed emotion, where he's like, yeah, I got it. And one of the stewardess made a joke like, that's a lot of money. And he reaches into the bag and offers the stewardess $6,000.
There you go. Yeah.
Here's a tip. And she said, she made a joke. Hey, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to accept gratuity. And so she didn't take it. But it's another thing that's interesting about this guy. He's risking his life to do this and liberty to do this.
Yeah.
For $200,000. If you're going to do this, Tim, for $200,000, you're going to be giving it away on your way out?
Yeah. Well,
I'm not.
Yeah. I'm so fascinated by it because I'm just like, think about the level of planning he must have gone into this. You know, when you're up there and when you drop that note and you're like, well, fucking game on, dude. This is it. I'm robbing this plane. Do they think, was the bomb legit? Do they think the bomb was legit? He took it with him, right? When
he took it with him.
Vanished.
We don't know. And that's one of the things about this case where if you would have asked me 6 years ago when I started the show, was that bomb real? I would have said 99% sure the bomb's not real. The stewardess gets one look at it, and she describes it as it's like a sort of a cheapy, plasticky attaché briefcase. And inside, she describes 8 red sticks, some wires, a large, what would be like a lantern-style battery.
Yeah, sounds almost cartoonish.
Yes, I was going to say a cartoon bomb. Whatever Bugs Bunny would have in a briefcase, that's what Cooper brings aboard this plane. And I've really changed on that. Right now, I would say I'm 51% sure that the bomb was real.
Oh.
And 49% sure it was fake. And the only reason for that is when they land in Seattle, he lets the passengers off. He gets his $200,000 and his 4 parachutes. The pilots have the ability to escape that cockpit with some hokey little rope ladder. You pop out a window and they can escape.
Okay, yeah.
Legitimately, that's what it is.
I'm seeing it in my mind, yeah.
And they could have done that. It might have been a little bit more difficult for Tina Mucklow to get off because he requested that one stewardess stay behind so she could be the go-between between him and the flight crew in the cockpit. And I feel like if the FBI at that point was like, you're not taking off. You're just not going to take off. It's not going to happen. We're not going to let you take off. What choice does he have in that moment?
Yeah.
He can either very embarrassingly be arrested with a fake bomb, which so embarrassing. Or if the bomb's real, he could just say, I'm not being taken alive. I'm not going to jail for the rest of my life for this. And who cares about your airplane? Here we go.
Yeah, right.
And even in that scenario, I wonder if he would have let the one stewardess off the plane because he cared enough about them that he didn't want them to be hungry.
Right. Yeah. That's the weird part. He was very gentlemanly, it seems like, over the course of this whole caper. So it's...
Absolutely. Tina Mucklow is interviewed immediately after she gets off the plane. I mean, immediately. We're not talking about she goes home and then the next day or a news crew calls her. Immediately, she's doing a press conference. And in that press conference, I'm paraphrasing, but this is real close to a direct quote. She says he was polite and kind and never unfriendly, and he got annoyed when the fuel trucks were taking a long time, but he was never rude or unkind to me. No. And this is immediately after she describes him as polite and never unkind.
He was the man, DB Cooper. He was the man. It's really, yeah. I can see why he's become so beloved over the years, especially nowadays. And what flummoxes me about the case, part why I have not fallen down into the vortex, is because I'm a lot like you. I'm sort of obsessive. So once I dig into something, I have to know everything. And what kind of served as a roadblock for me. And I don't want to fall into the trap of what you said about these other podcasts. It's just the litany of suspects. To me, it's like I can't keep track of all these people. There are so many suspects. It's crazy in a way. It's hard to manage. I can see how you have content for the Cooper Vortex, because it always seems like there's someone else that comes along that people try to fit into this puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. And new suspects all the time. One of my thoughts in doing the show was there are suspects that I don't believe at all was DB Cooper. Richard McCoy, for example. He's a copycat. I don't believe at all he was DB Cooper. The FBI didn't believe at all he was DB Cooper. The FBI believed they ruled him out. And his story is so fascinating and so wild and so interesting that I want that story to be told, regardless of if he's DB Cooper or not. But I want that he is DB Cooper to be part of that story. So in my show, when I'm letting someone present their suspect, I'm not refuting any of their evidence. Mm-hmm. In my show, everyone gets the chance to present their best case for their work. And you as the listener get to decide who's onto something, who's not smart, who's crazy, who has some interesting things to say. And so I wanted all these different suspect stories to be told, like Barb Dayton, for example. There's a transgender suspect in the DB Cooper case.
Yeah, there was like an HBO special that's kind of what like what confounded me, because I watched the HBO special and it was like 4 different suspects, and I'm like, each one they make the case so well that's it. You're watching the first segment, you're like, well, there you go, that was DB Cooper, and then they're like, meet this person, and then they tell that story, and I'm like, well, shit, now I think that person's DB Cooper. I don't know. I'm all
absolutely confused. I'm a gullible fool, and so I am more subject to that than anyone else. But even still, like, if I came on here to prove to you that Barb Dayton is DB Cooper, I could make a great case for her being DB Cooper. I just told you I don't think Richard McCoy is Cooper at all. I could make a great case for him being DB Cooper. And it's just the thing about this case, like I said, Cooper only exists for like 5 hours. Right. And we know so little about him. And what we do know for sure is so average for middle-aged men in 1971. I mean, if you're Cooper, the youngest and the oldest description we have for him is like 35 to 55. And so if you're a 35 to 55-year-old male in 1971, is there a good chance that you served in the military? Yeah, probably more than 50%. Is there a good chance you smoked cigarettes? Yeah, it's probably like 85%. Is there a good chance you're white with maybe olive or swarthy skin, of average height with dark hair? Yes, that's most men in the United States. I made a joke on my show once that if you pulled up a picture of your grandpa, he's a dead ringer for one of the 2 sketches. And I had someone email me and they're like, hey, I know for a fact that my grandpa was not DB Cooper, but look at this picture of him. It exactly matches the sketch. And I'm like, yes, this is what is wrong with this case.
Yeah, it's wild. Now, I like following this character, Eric Ullis. He does a lot of interesting, he's always doing some kind of like interesting thing. So I have to suspect that he would be the one to do this. But has anyone tried to recreate the jump? Not necessarily like from the plane, but not necessarily like from that kind of plane or dangerously out the back steps or whatever, but just jumping in the area where they think it happened to sort of track that in a real-time way as an experiment or something.
I don't know. I don't believe that has been specifically recreated, because when you talk about Cooper's jump, it's not an easy one. So he is jumping at night. He's jumping, most likely he's looking down, if he can see, at the tops of clouds, and with a light rain. It's not a storm or anything by any means like that. If you've ever been in the Pacific Northwest, you know that there's just a light rain that comes down all the time. It's miserable. That's what happens every day. And so you wouldn't necessarily want to recreate a night jump into an unknown territory. Yeah. It would be a bad idea.
All right. But what about just a daytime, just to see?
But in the daytime, there have been a couple different, I'm not sure if they're 727s or DC-9s, but both have aft stairs. And there have been several different like skydiving conventions and events where you can get enough people to make it financially viable to send that large ass jet up in the air and have people jump out the back of it. My friend Nicky Broughton just did his first tandem jump out of the back of a jet, which is
wow.
pretty badass.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I have no training for do this, but part of me was like a dream or a fantasy or something. Was like on the 50th anniversary, I would have loved to have done the jump. That's when they should have done it. Like someone should have just done it to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the event. So, but yeah, it would be interesting to see if people, when they pull the parachute, they kind of figure out more about where. But it's always with the wind, as you're saying, like the rain. It's almost impossible really to get a super accurate like read on how the jump would go.
Yeah, you're not going to get an exact recreation because who is going to sign up for, hey, you're going to jump out of a plane over a completely unknown area in the dark.
Yeah.
Which, that is another thing I think is real interesting. Tim, how much experience do you have piloting submarines?
Well, that would be none.
None. Okay. So would you plan a crime where your only escape is by submarine?
Oh, no, not at all. I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
So if Cooper is going to plan this crime, unless it's his very first time in the Pacific Northwest and he's never read a paper, he would know that if he's boarding a plane at 2:50 for this hijacking, by the time he's able to jump out or taking off from Seattle, it is going to be pitch dark outside.
Yeah.
He would have to be a complete fool to know that he's going to be doing a night jump. In my opinion, he definitely planned for a night jump over unknown territory. So do you think that this is a guy where it's his first parachute jump? Or do you think it's a guy that thinks he's so badass that he wants to do a night jump over unknown territory because he believes that he can do that and that you can't, and that you won't follow him?
Yeah, and you won't catch him. Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've used this example before, but like if Travis Pastrana is going to rob a bank, his escape vehicle is going to be a dirt bike because he's super confident in that ability. And he's better than you at riding a motorcycle.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. And I mean, he clearly had, like I said, when he dropped that note, and it was like, it's go time. Like he knew this ends, could end in much different ways, but ideally in his mind, it ends with me jumping out of this plane. And so he had to know if it all goes like, that's the crazy part. It's not even like a worst case scenario. It's like the ideal, the perfect way for this caper that I've planned out to end is that I'm jumping out of the back of the plane with the money. It's
and if you want a night jump, I'm doing this crime tomorrow, and I'm going to do a night jump. I'm not choosing the Pacific Northwest. I'm jumping out over Nebraska or Kansas, where I'm going to land in some cornfield, and I can just tuck my parachute away. I'm immediately out of sight. I'm not going to land in the woods. I'm not going to land in a lake. So why did he choose a night jump, and why did he choose? It's not the most rugged terrain, but it's not ideal.
Yeah. Now, do you think? I suppose what a lot of the researchers do. You could really try to glean insight into this guy's, his profile from the stuff he said on the plane, because that's the only real information you have, right? So it does seem like he had some. He's arguing with them about whether the thing can fly with the stairs. That seems like he has some. Beyond, in addition to the parachuting knowledge, like some kind of aviation knowledge. It seems from the way he interacted with the pilots and had sort of an idea of like where he wanted to go and all that stuff. Like I wouldn't be able to like tell the pilot, I need you to go this to wherever. So it's
you're not going to tell a pilot what flap settings he should set the plane at.
Exactly. You got me right where I was trying to go. Yeah.
This is the question to ask, Tim, because he had this insane set of knowledge. So he basically describes the ideal jump conditions for a 727. Does the landing gear need to be down to pull that off? No, but he requests it. And I believe that the reason he requests the landing gear remain down is to keep them below like 200, 250 miles an hour. Because you have Martin McNally, a copycat, who does essentially the same thing. And the pilots are like, you fuck this guy. he doesn't know the difference between 200 miles an hour and 400 miles an hour in the air. We'll kill him with speed. And so when he jumps out, they're doing 325 miles an hour or something like that. And he's instantly knocked unconscious.
Oh my God.
When he leaves the plane. But because, like I said earlier, parachutes work, he regains his consciousness in the air and pulls the ripcord and survives the jump. Goes to prison for a long time. He's out now. But it's, how did he know, first of all, that the plane could be jumped? Because the pilots didn't believe it could be, and the pilots weren't even sure that the plane could fly with the aft stairs down. But also, so Cooper knows all this, and when he's getting ready to jump from the plane, Tina sees him put the parachute on, and he instructs her to go back to the cockpit to be left alone. And when she goes back to the cockpit, he calls in with that interphone or intercom, whatever you want to call it, and asks for instructions on how to lower the aft stairs. And Tina comes back and shows him and goes back to the cockpit. Now that's interesting because here you have this guy that knows the exact conditions to jump from this plane, knows it can be jumped, but doesn't know how to lower the aft stairs himself. It's a really, really interesting mix of knowledge.
Yeah, that is.
And if you really crack down on who would have known that that plane could have been jumped from, there's like 2 or 3 avenues. So in Vietnam, the CIA and the Air Force were testing the use of the 727 as a way to drop troops and supplies from a plane that could be disguised, obviously, as a commercial airliner, because it was. Yeah. So on the outside, it could say Qantas Airways or whatever. But really, it's full of troops and gear on the inside that they're going to push out the back.
Yeah.
So that was going on in Vietnam. And interestingly, I've talked to a couple of Vietnam vets, and I've got a weird mix of everyone knew that was going on, and I've never heard that was going on, and I've never heard anything about that.
Interesting.
Which is hilarious. There's also a company, and I'm sorry, their name escapes me right now, but I want to say it was in Arizona or New Mexico. It was a CIA sort of fronted business with loose ties to Air America that was testing the ability of the 727 to use as troop transport and some covert operations, as well as there was a really small test in like Eastern Washington where Boeing was just sort of testing what this plane could do, like extremes and different things. So they would have been doing wild things. Maybe some things they did didn't work. Maybe they're like, okay, well, yeah, we can jump from this.
Yeah. So, and as you said, Boeing was like, they knew that you could do it.
Yeah, Boeing knew.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So it kind of helps to narrow the pool down a little bit because you get some. That's how we come up with all these different suspects. Now, is there anyone running around claiming that they are DB Cooper?
Oh, yeah. Many, many people. One of the most interesting things about this case is that I had a friend tell me a couple months ago, was like, dude, he knows I'm obsessed with DB Cooper, but he doesn't really follow it. And he's like, dude, wouldn't it be cool if there was a guy who was just like gave a deathbed confession? And I'm like, there have been 27 deathbed confessions to being DB Cooper. And depending on who you believe and which account, I've read as many as over 1,000 people have confessed to being DB Cooper. If you think that's ridiculous, just go on Twitter and type I am DB Cooper in your search bar, and there will be 10,000 people that have broadcast that on Twitter. I interviewed Larry Carr, who is sort of like this transformative case agent in the DB Cooper case. He campaigned to be on the case inside the FBI, finally gets it. And then his idea was, it's been 35 years and we haven't gone anywhere. So I'm going to push this into the media and get media attention and leads, and maybe someone knows the story or their grandpa or blah, blah, blah. And so he really got this case pushed forward in the media and moved it out. And when I interviewed him on my show, one of the things he said that just totally blew me away is that in his 5 or 6 years as the lead agent on the case, several people went into FBI offices to confess to being DB Cooper.
Huh.
And he knew right away, like, this, it's not true. It's not this guy. But I get the idea of me and you are at the bar and I'm like, hey, Tim, you know that DB Cooper thing? That was me. Right. Isn't it cool? I'm awesome. I totally get that confession. The confession I don't get is where you walk into the FBI office and confess to a crime you know you did not commit.
Yeah, well, those are people who are a little unhinged, who need attention in a negative way, I think. So we also have deathbed confessions. That's the weird one. That's the weird. That's really weird. But taped ones, interesting.
Taped ones, even better than taped ones. So you can listen to Walter Recca's confession to being DB Cooper. I want to say the doc is called DB Cooper: The Real Story. It's on Amazon. I really like it. I don't really believe Walter Recca was DB Cooper, but you can listen to this confession. I want to say the whole series, it's like 4-episode doc. It's like $10.
Oh, God.
I highly recommend it.
Wow.
But Walter Recca confessed to his friend Carl Lauren, and Carl Lauren wasn't allowed to release that until after Walt died. We have Kenny Christensen, who sort of gives a half confession on his deathbed. You have Dwayne Weber, who didn't even say that he was DB Cooper. He said, I'm Dan Cooper. And then this is like 1997 or something. So his wife, Jo Weber, doesn't know that name, goes to the library and looks it up, finds Max Gunther's DB Cooper, what really happened, and says she saw her husband's handwriting in the margins of that book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, after his confession.
That's weird.
That's pretty weird and interesting.
But
she spent the rest of her life trying to prove that. So from like 97 to 2022, she fell into
the vortex.
Oh, yeah. She could be DB Cooper's biggest victim.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah. But with any of these confessions, have they... I would presume they've been like vetted by the FBI, at least that they have looked into them and like they still, because I feel like if they could solve this case, they would. Or I also heard theories that they kind of are embarrassed that they never did, and now they're like, just let it go. But I feel like if they knew for sure who it was, dead or alive, they would want people to know.
The FBI is under a lot of scrutiny, especially right now. They're not very popular, and there is evidence of them doing some shady stuff in the past and maybe in the present. But I have spoken to many FBI agents that worked on this case, and all of them wanted to be the one to solve it. All of them wanted to be the one to do a perp walk with DB Cooper. All of them wanted to go on the news and be like, I solved this. Look at me. I closed the DB Cooper case.
Yeah.
And so whether or not the FBI is corrupt or they're covering something up or they're involved in this or whatever, I just can't believe any of that talking to the agents directly.
Yeah.
And I don't think the FBI had any reason to cover this up. I don't see any involvement from the FBI. If you want to talk about CIA involvement or shady shit, yeah, I'm more interested in talking about that and more willing to listen because the FBI files are out. And unless there's some super secret batch of some super secret stuff that none of us are aware of, it seemed like they did every single thing they could to figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's crazy. It's an awesome case. Now, are there people, I'm thinking about like the different subcultures and sort of the celebrity status of some of these people. What's life like for Tina Mucklower? Are these people kind of like celebrities in the DB Cooper community, or they kind of like want nothing to do with all this?
They want nothing to do with it. Tina Mucklow has said that the harassment she's received about DB Cooper was 10 times worse than the hijacking. And so I've never contacted her. I want to make that very clear. I've never made any effort to contact her or any of the stewardess involved. And I think there were some bad actors in the DB Cooper community that didn't handle the primary people in this case well. And so they're very, very hesitant to talk to or deal with anyone involved in the DB Cooper community, which honestly, I totally understand.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, the true crime community is, it can be kind of toxic. It can be pretty toxic. And even though this is sort of like a different kind of true crime, it fits the mold where there's so many suspects. And if you fall on someone's radar, if you're around, like if you're still alive, God help you, because they dig into your whole life and shit. It's I've seen it with these other cases. It's
interesting. I have a lot of friends that do true crime podcasts or mysterious and unsolved type podcasts. And DB Cooper is true crime. This is a crime that happened. This is true. But when I talk to my podcaster friends, their audience leans heavily female in the true crime space. And if I look at who's around at DB CooperCon, or if I'm looking on the forums, or if I look at who my subscribers are, or who's in these DB Cooper chat rooms, it's 95% men. That might even be a conservative number.
Yeah.
And the people super obsessed with this case, it's an interesting mix. I would say it's like 30% true crime fans that are interested in DB Cooper. And then there's like 50% that are aviation and skydiving people, but not true crime people. And then I would say the final 20% are this group of insane wackos like myself that it's the fact that you're interested in this and then there's no answer, so you can't let it go.
Yeah.
Because myself, I would not describe myself as a true crime fan. I would not describe myself as someone super interested in aviation or skydiving. So why the hell am I doing this? It's something there. It's like, this is super interesting. It's the most interesting book I've ever read, but the first 3 chapters are gone and the last 5 chapters are gone.
Yeah.
And so now I'm just like, well, how did this start and how did this end?
Yeah, it's the mystery of it. You can get really hooked on it. It's like you said, it's the vortex. It happens with a lot of these cases. I'm really surprised, as I said, at how much of this has become a subculture, just the DB Cooper world. When would you say, okay, so this all happened like 71, the FBI is looking into it. When did it sort of like start? When did this sort of start? The DB Cooper, like, it became its own world, if you will. You know what I'm saying?
I would say between 2008 and 2011. And the reason for that would be you have people start posting on this skydiving forum called Drop Zone. And so this forum is dedicated to skydiving and, hey, where can I find a cool drop zone in Toledo, Ohio? Or, hey, I'm going to be traveling with some buddies and where can we get this gear and rent this? It's a skydiving forum for skydivers about skydiving. And they had a history section. And I don't know who the first post was. I'd have to go back and look. It might be Joe Weber, but they open up this DB Cooper thread like, hey, what do you think of DB Cooper? Like, that's the most famous skydiver ever. And it's badass. It's this interesting story. And so you have that start of the Drop Zone thread. And then I believe Jeffrey Gray's book Skyjack came out in 2010 or 2011.
Yeah.
And he held the first CooperCon, although he called it the DB Cooper Symposium. Ooh. Or it's just a bunch of these minds to get together in person and talk about this case and meet in person while we were just arguing on the internet. And I think once that happened, you had a couple other characters that showed up that were very prominent. Bruce Smith and Robert Blevins were just relentless, dogged in their pursuit of the truth of this.
Yeah.
And it developed an audience. I mean, I sort of came to this through Robert Blevins and Kenny Christensen. I read Jeffrey Gray's Skyjack, which kind of sort of points to Kenny Christensen, but then he alludes to, I'm working with this guy and he won't talk to me anymore because he's going to write his own book. And I read Jeffrey Gray's book like 3 years after it came out. So when I finished it, I was like, well, damn, is that other book out yet? And I looked it up and there was a book out. So I got that and read that. Boom. Now I've read 2 books about D.B. Cooper. It was Kenny Christensen. I've solved the case. Okay, now I know more than everyone else about D.B. Cooper. But then unfortunately that was alluding to this drop zone forum. I got on there and everyone on there was just totally shitting over Kenny Christensen. And I was like, well, okay, if it's not him, then who is it?
Yeah.
And then unfortunately from there, I couldn't put it down.
But to circle back a little bit, but when I guess sort of I see this as like the modern Renaissance or whatever, but you said there were like books that came out like in the 80s and 90s. So like, was this always kind of percolating in the year shortly thereafter the case? Like someone must have written the first book on this case. Do you know who did that?
There were 3 books that came out in the 80s. I'm not sure which one came out first. It might have been Tussauds. Ralph Himmelsbach, he was not the lead agent on the case, but he sort of inserted himself into the media as the lead agent. Yeah. He was about to retire when the skyjacking took place. He was a private pilot with his own plane. So he was like, hey, I'm an FBI agent. I'll go out look for him too. And then just sort of became this figurehead. He wrote his own book about it. When you look at some of the older D.B. Cooper stuff, it's going to be Ralph Himmelsbach and Ralph Himmelsbach's comments. But those 3 books, Ralph Himmelsbach wrote a book, I want to say it's 85. Tussauds' book, I think, is 84. Okay. And then Max Gunther's D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened, is also 1985. Don't quote me on those. I'm pretty sure about the Max Gunther one because there's so much talk about that.
This will all be reflected in the quiz at the end of the show.
Yeah. Himmelsbach and Tussauds, they're both FBI agents that wrote about the case. Really small, maybe sort of semi-independent publishers. Right. Not much reach. There's not much interest. But the other book by Max Gunther was a pretty famous journalist by that time. He had written for True magazine and made a name for himself. He wrote a book about getting rich, I believe. But a well-respected, serious journalist. And he puts this book out in 1985 called D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened, about his contact with 2 different people. The first person claiming to be D.B. Cooper, and then that contact sort of fizzled out, and then years went by, and D.B. Cooper's love interest, shall we say, reached back out to Max Gunther. Hey, he was a big fan of yours. I want to tell the story. And so she develops this communication with him. They never met in person. She tells him this whole story of what happened in the D.B. Cooper case. And he releases the book as nonfiction. And he says in the book, I am unable to verify all of the facts in this. And I'm not 100% sure if it's true. But I believe it to be true. And I'm presenting this as nonfiction. And to do that in 85 with your reputation as a writer is a much bigger risk than it would be today. Yeah. Who's a serious journalist? Glenn Greenwald. If he came out with a nonfiction book about what happened to D.B. Cooper and it was just insane, once he went back to journalism, we wouldn't care. We would think he released a joke book. No big deal. Who cares about that? But in 85, it would have been a bigger deal. Yeah. Now, looking back at that book, it's almost been 40 years since that book's come out. And we have the FBI files. We have a bunch of information that Max Gunther did not have. There are many things he got wrong in that book. There are many details that are wrong. However, there were some very interesting ones that he got right in advance of information that we didn't have until the FBI files came out. Two things specifically in that book that are jarring that he got right. The first is he placed Cooper working in industrial chemicals in his book. And why is that interesting when I said we don't know anything about D.B. Cooper? Because D.B. Cooper leaves his tie on that plane, and there has been independent forensic analysis, not by the FBI. All of the forensics in this case has been done by independent researchers and not by the FBI, which is wild.
Yeah.
But we look at that tie, and there's some insane rare earth metals. There's some crazy alloys. There's some super rare metals, things that you and I would never, ever have on our clothes.
Yeah.
And so we were sort of looking at these weird titanium particles on the tie, and titanium's not in wide use in 1971. And as a matter of fact, it's quite rare. And one application for titanium in the late 60s, early 70s would have been industrial chemical use.
Interesting.
Where you need to store some sort of a highly corrosive material. You can do it in this titanium tank.
Yeah.
That won't be a big deal. You might also have some like high pressure lines or fittings that are made of titanium.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like they said he was a cab driver.
Right.
There's no reason. Industrial chemicals. That's
very specific. What was the other detail that he got right?
The other shocking detail is he sort of tells the story about D.B. Cooper goes to this drop zone in Lake Elsinore. Or not Cooper, a man goes to this drop zone in Lake Elsinore asking about jumping from a 727 and the feasibility of doing that and what they got going on. And the guys there remembered that he was wearing Cochrane boots. And so in Max Gunther's book, he tells the story that Cooper goes to this Lake Elsinore drop zone and asks about jumping from a 727, and this all predates the hijacking.
Yeah.
And we've never heard the story. It only is in Max Gunther's book. It's only in Max Gunther's book. Then, in like 2018, the FBI files come out, and there's this crazy Lake Elsinore ghost story where you have a guy coming into that drop zone 6 months prior to the hijacking, asking these questions about jumping from a jet, and they described him wearing Cochrane boots, which is a really specific like Air Force jump boot.
Wow. That's remarkable. Yeah, that's interesting. See, that's what I was going to ask you about the FBI file, in a sense, is one of the things they use to weed out suspects and things like that, confessions in these crimes, is they always hold back a little information, some details. But I presume with the FBI file out there now, there really isn't anything that we're aware of that is held back. I mean, is it possible that anything's still held back, or is it just going to be in the files?
There are some redacted names in there, and some of them, unfortunately, we've sort of figured out that it's a redacted name of a dead person, so it doesn't need to be redacted. But there are other files that have been released where we've got complete sections that are redacted where it's obvious it was like, hey, we talked to Darren Shaefer at this address, and it'd be like my name and the address would be completely blacked out because, whatever the clerk was did a quick search and saw that I'm still alive.
Right. I mean, something like during the hijacking, he would have said some sort of snippet, I wish I had a ham sandwich right now. And they're like, look, don't tell anyone that he said that. That way we know who it was if he ever shows up. We gotta have that little bit of, that kind of thing. But I assume that everything like that is probably contained in the FBI files now.
There was an FBI file. I wish I remembered all of them off the top of my head, but Ryan Burns put this out, and it's probably on his website, norjack.org. But he found this FBI file. There were 8 questions that the FBI would ask to people who confessed to the crime.
Yeah.
Just a very quick, hey, If you don't pass this 8, then we're not even going to listen to you.
Right, right.
And interestingly, we're all talking about DB Cooper, DB Cooper, DB Cooper. He never gave that name. Right. He never gave that name. He gave his name as Cooper, Dan Cooper. And the gate agent writes Dan Cooper on the ticket. The reason we're all saying DB Cooper is in Portland, there's this mix-up where there's a reporter talking to a police officer about this case. And there was a convicted felon in the Portland area who went by DB Cooper. And they were about to go knock on this guy's door. So the reporter gets this Dan Cooper, DB Cooper thing mixed up and releases that it was DB Cooper that committed the skyjacking. When in the FBI files, you look, they knock on DB Cooper's door, and he's like living in a trailer watching a game show when they knock on his door. And he's like, no, bro, that wasn't me. It doesn't even make sense. And this is my alibi.
Yeah.
And of course it checks out right away. It doesn't make sense that it was him. But I don't have anything to back this up, but it's my opinion that the FBI really liked the fact that the media knew him as DB Cooper, because immediately your first question can be like, what name did you give the gate agent when you bought your ticket?
Right.
And you as a confessor, Tim, you're going to be like, I told him my name was DB Cooper.
Yeah, and they're like, all right, get the hell out of here.
All right, get out of here.
Yeah. It's a fantastic case. I'm so glad we've done this episode. There's so much. It's just really, really fascinating to me. Did the kid, the college kid, he only recently kind of came out and did an interview or kind of opened up about this, right?
Yeah, he came to CooperCon in 2021. I think he's sort of his first appearance because I'm going to paraphrase this, and I don't want to take words out of your mouth, Bill, but he was on a trip with his wife, and he visited, I'm going to get this wrong, embarrassingly, but there was that September 11th plane that crashed in a field like in Ohio or something. Or Pennsylvania. So there's a memorial for that flight. Is it 95?
Oh, now you're really testing.
I don't want to get that wrong, but
I don't know that.
Anyway, there's a memorial.
It was the Let's Roll plane. It was the Let's Roll plane. They made the movie about it. Yeah.
Yes. And so him and his wife are at that memorial, and he just starts to be overcome with emotion, thinking about like he was on a hijacked plane and starts to cry. And so
wow.
There's like this attendant at the memorial who sees this and comes up to him, and she puts his hand on his shoulder and is like, it's okay. Did you know someone who was on that flight? And he said, no, I was actually on a hijacked flight. And she was like, no way. And he was like, yeah, have you ever heard of DB Cooper? And she was like, you were on DB Cooper's flight? That's insane. And in that moment, he was just like, I should tell my story.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't be turning away from these people who want to talk to me about this. And so he came to CooperCon and talked about it. And one of my favorite things he said was that, immediately after he's interviewed by the FBI and whatnot, and then that's done, he goes home and has Thanksgiving. And then a couple days later, the FBI shows up at his parents' house, and they have like yearbooks from the United States Parachuting Association.
Oh, God.
They have yearbooks from this other thing. They have 15 different photos of these different people that are just out of the military. And they were seriously like, okay, look at these 200 photographs and let us know if any of them look familiar.
Oh, boy.
And that didn't happen one time. That happened multiple times.
Oh, God.
And so he said within like 2 years, he'd looked at so many pictures of people that the FBI wanted to put in front of him that even 2 years later, he had no recollection of what the guy really looked at because he's only seen these sketches a million times.
Yeah.
And the FBI putting pictures in front of him, which really goes to show you how little they had to go on when they're going to go to a witness with a yearbook and say, look at all of these pictures. Does any of them look familiar?
Well, yeah, it's really a remarkable case. Now, you mentioned the necktie. That seems to be the where people have kind of turned their attention in recent years, because that has the chemical. That's where that's the only place they can get any evidence, really, any physical evidence from the case. Do you think that could possibly lead somewhere, or is it so like arcane that it's going to take a while before it ever leads something?
I'm going to say I hope it leads somewhere. And you go back to 1971. DNA wasn't an idea any of the FBI agents had in their mind at all. You can see pictures of FBI agents handling the tie with their bare hands.
Right.
So the idea we're going to pull any DNA off of it, which we've tried, it's just not going to happen at this point when at least dozens of people have handled it.
Yeah. And
we tried a DNA test, and the DNA we pulled off the tie was a private citizen who has done most of the forensic work on the tie, is whose DNA we found on the tie. But on the tie, there is this insane collection of a ton. I'm not talking about like there's one weird titanium alloy. Right. No, there are thousands of weird, unique titanium alloys and unique metals.
Interesting.
And you have these metals that are like 100%. So you're looking at things that are 100% gold, 100% iron, 100% silver. So it's like, where would he be that would have these tie particles on a clip-on tie?
Right.
I just had this titanium expert on my show. He's 90 years old. His name was Stan Siegel, and he is sharp as a tack. Told me he went golfing with his grandsons earlier that day. And he worked in the titanium industry from the late 50s, basically the development of the titanium industry through the 60s and 70s, became vice president of R&D at RMI Titanium, and then became a consultant for the International Titanium Association.
Oh, boy.
And I had him on the show to ask what he thought of all of these weird particles and these titanium alloys that are so rare. And I asked him, like, Stan, where did this tie come from? Because you would know better than anyone else.
Right.
And he's like, with what's on there, I truly have no idea.
Weird.
It's so weird because the titanium industry, Cooper hijacks this plane in 71. That tie was manufactured 63, 64-ish. So you have like 63 to 71. Yeah. The titanium industry between 63 and 71 is very small, and everyone knew everyone else. Because I interviewed this guy, Stan Siegel, and there are two suspects in the DB Cooper world that are suspects based completely off of the tie.
Right, yeah.
And Stan Siegel knew both of those guys personally.
Oh, wow.
Like,
so it's that small community.
Small the titanium world was back then.
What does he think of them as suspects? Is he like, no, Ralph's not jumping out of a plane on Thanksgiving Eve or something like that?
There was one guy he knew of. He thought he might have met him at a conference or something. He definitely knew his name and knew of his work, but wasn't 100% sure that he'd met him in person. So he couldn't really say his thoughts on if that guy would be Cooper or not. But he did say that it was very interesting, him as a suspect.
Well, I kind of alluded to it just now, but the timing of it is also very, like, just weird. It's just weird. Like, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, chances are most people are kind of already where they're going to be for Thanksgiving, or they are traveling to family. But you know what I'm saying? It's like you kind of know what's going on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving with your dad or your husband or Uncle Ralph or whatever. It's like people would know, well, Uncle Ralph where was Uncle Ralph this year for Thanksgiving? It's like, oh, and they kind of but it's very odd like that, where it's a noteworthy day. You kind of remember what's going on that day. You remember people around you. And so that's remarkable that it never kind of pinged off anyone when it went down.
Well, it's a good point. I've got two things to say about that. First, I'll say that I interviewed this gal who on my show just goes by Julie, and her father is a DB Cooper suspect.
Yeah.
And she does not agree with that assessment, nor do I really. But she said, I don't have proof that my dad was in the kitchen on Thanksgiving of 1971, but I'll tell you that my entire life, my dad always cooked the turkey. So if there was a Thanksgiving he was missing, I would know that. And I have no recollection of my dad ever being gone on Thanksgiving. I only remember that my dad was always the one to cook the turkey. I mean, not to mention her dad is Vince Peterson, and he's just not a legitimate suspect in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
The other thing I'm going to say about that, what was the question again? I had 2 points.
We're just sort of talking about the nature of it being the night before Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, the night before Thanksgiving.
It's a very memorable date.
My other point on this taking place the night before Thanksgiving is I think this goes to how well planned this was, because that's a very specific date. It wasn't like he chose March 16th. That doesn't matter. He chose the day before Thanksgiving. And why did he do that? Because he's doing this later in the day. So if the hijacking starts at let's say it starts at 2:55. He starts this hijacking at 2:55. By 2:55 on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, the A team has already gone home for their long weekend. So now you have the new guys and the B team and a skeleton crew to get through Thanksgiving weekend.
Right.
And with how well everything else is planned, do I think that he considered that? In my opinion, yeah, definitely.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. It's remarkable the level of detail and planning that he had to have put into this. It's really something else.
I don't think he scribbled it on a napkin the night before.
No, yeah. This was like when you watch a movie, they like rob a bank and they have all the elaborate shit going on and everything, and this is it, but it was the skyjacking. Now there were copycats after this happened, right? This kind of like spawned a little flap of people trying to do the same thing.
It definitely did. It also, not quick enough, but the one change that Cooper made to airline security would be the Cooper vane. And it didn't come into practice quick enough, but what the Cooper vane is it's a small flap on the aft stairs of a 727 that when it receives enough wind while the plane is flying, it'll flip to be in line with the airplane, which locks the aft stairs. And when there's not enough wind, that flap spring moves forward and you can lower and raise the aft stairs. But if the plane's in motion, it locks that so you can't lower or lift the aft stairs while the plane is in motion. The Cooper vane is his innovation. But to talk about copycats, I get my copycats a little mixed up sometimes, so forgive me if I say someone's name for a different person's hijacking. But when you look at them, the execution is wildly different than Cooper's. It's the same thing. It's give me some money and I'm going to jump out of the plane. That's the same thing. And that's where the similarities end. Because he's calm, cool, and collected the entire time. He's in control. The stewardess sits next to him, lighting his cigarettes. There's no insane confrontation. He has this well planned. I think McCoy's hijacking, I think McCoy improved upon a couple of things Cooper did, but McCoy's execution is terrible. He makes himself noticed right away. He makes some gross, sloppy mistakes. People are unsure of him. He draws attention to himself. But Cooper never does any of that. But my favorite copycat story, I believe it's Paul Sini, is he hijacks this plane, give me $1 trillion, and I'm going to jump out of this plane. A very, very badass stewardess decides, I'm going to slip this guy a handful of Valium in his drink.
Oh, wow.
So she does that, and his demands go from being aggressive and insane to being drunken and sloppy and he's out of it. This is not a joke. His demands go from like, I want $330,000 to, can I have 3 cheeseburgers, a rental car, and a 30-second head start? That is legitimately what his demands devolve into once he's just completely messed up on this Valium.
Oh, man.
And so the police are like, fine, we got 3 cheeseburgers, a rental car, and we'll give you 30 seconds. Come on down.
Wow.
And he's barely able to like get down the stairs. He's tackled immediately and arrested.
Yeah.
There's another skyjacker who received an axe to the back of the head.
Oh, wow.
From one of the flight crew, which,
holy shit.
Why is there an axe on an airplane? In what situation
Yeah, I don't know.
would you be like, I need an axe? Like
don't
desert
know.
island survival, maybe?
To break into the cockpit, I guess, if the pilot goes crazy. That's the only...
It was from the cockpit.
Oh, God. I don't know. That's weird. Maybe to smash the windows if you get into the water. That's the only thing. Maybe you just need a little hammer for that. But I don't know. That's an interesting question. Now, you mentioned this earlier. You mentioned it again now, and it really piqued my interest. Why was the stewardess lighting his cigarettes? I presume he requested this, but like, why? That seems really strange.
I just think it was part of that time period. He, she said, he was kind and polite. He also had one hand at most times or often in this briefcase where he could potentially connect the wire and blow the whole thing up.
Right.
But I think more than that, it was just a product of that time.
Interesting. Yeah.
If I was smoking a cigarette on an airplane with my wife seated next to me, I don't know if she would light my cigarette for me. But here we have this hijacker and the stewardess, and she's lighting the cigarettes for him.
Yeah. Did they talk a lot while they were going through all this? I mean, she's sitting next to him the whole time. I'm surprised. I feel like I would try to just chat him up to get as much information about him as I could.
Yeah, she sits next to him for at least 3 hours. There were a couple interesting things that we can take from that. At one point, she sort of mentions she's from Minnesota, I believe. And Cooper says, Minnesota, that's nice country. Which, okay, that's interesting. He may or may not have been in Minnesota. It's not going to solve the case for us, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting turn of phrase.
The other thing that he says to her, she asks him, do you have a grudge against the airline?
Yeah.
And this is a direct quote from the files. I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss. I just have a grudge.
That's such a great line.
It's so great. It's so great. There's at one point he's sort of annoyed that they haven't got the parachutes and the money yet. And so he's like, he mentions something about Fort Lewis is only 20 minutes away. What's taking so long? So, and he mentions at one point when they're circling, he looks down and is like, it looks like we're over Tacoma.
Yeah.
So obviously he has some familiarity with the area. It's interesting that he points out Fort Lewis, it's like Lewis McCord now, I think it's called.
Yeah.
But I think it's so funny that the idea that SeaTac is 20 minutes from Fort Lewis or Lewis McCord now, because with Seattle traffic now, it'd be like a 95-minute drive.
Oh, wow. Jeez. Well, I'm surprised. I'm not a big advocate for this, but I'm surprised the FBI, and maybe they did. I'm surprised they didn't surprised they didn't hypnotize her to recollect more of the conversation to see if there's anything that, she might have forgotten in the moment and then later would remember.
That's very interesting, especially given that time period where the FBI and the CIA seems like they were more open to those sort of wackier or more fanciful or woo-woo ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I've
heard that proposed by independent researchers,
but sure she do it now.
At this point, it's too late. Like, I could ask you, hey, you went to that KFC in Houston 9 months ago. Do you remember that? You're like, okay, yeah, I do remember. I was in Houston. I did go to Kentucky Fried Chicken. Do you remember seeing a guy in the back? No, of course not. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
Even if, okay, let's say the Kentucky Fried Chicken you're at gets robbed. You're at KFC in Houston. It gets robbed. All right. Now I'm coming to you 5 years later. The guy that robbed that place, do you remember what his shoes look like? Do you remember his face at all?
Yeah.
No. You should have asked me that later that day. It's been 5 years and I have a loose memory now of what it is.
Yeah.
Now extrapolate that times 10, 50 years later.
Right.
When she's been shown all this. And without a doubt, there's no way she hasn't like, oh, there's a DB Cooper doc on Netflix.
Oh, yeah.
I'll check that out. I'll take a peek at that.
Has she been in any of these documentaries?
Yes, she participated in a 2016 special on the History Channel called DB Cooper Case Closed with a question mark at the end.
Always, yeah.
Which that was about Robert Rackstraw, which was ridiculous, but she's at the end of that and doing what she's done probably a billion times, which I hate. They got Tina Mucklow and they had to do the same dumb bullshit that she probably didn't want to do, which is, hey, look at these pictures in front of you. Do any of them look like Cooper? And she's like, no.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, back to McCoy even. McCoy seems like a legitimate, interesting suspect when that skyjacking happens because it's so similar to Cooper's. But immediately, the FBI are like, okay, we got a bunch of pictures of him and we took an audio recording of him talking.
Oh, wow.
So they take those pictures and the audio recording of him talking. They bring that to Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner. And they said, is this the skyjacker? And right away, both of them are like, nope, that's not him. Too young, wrong voice.
Interesting.
And the FBI also sort of ruled out that it could be him based on where he was at the time. There's a ton of things to rule out McCoy, but it's just interesting that they had, and this is only 6 months after DB Cooper's hijacking.
Yeah.
They're shown these pictures and audio recordings of his voice. So I guess I've thought about this a million times. Like, what would I ask Tina Mucklow? Because I wouldn't show her pictures and say, which one of these guys do you think is Cooper? Yeah. I think that's too ridiculous at this point in time. What I would want to ask her...
Oh, yes. Go. I was going to say, I'll throw wine in so you can, if you ever get her, if you ever talk, any smells, any distinct sort of smells. That might be, did he...
That would be interesting. Like, oh, yeah, he was wearing high karate. Like, I know high karate for sure.
Right. I recognized his color, but it probably would have come out by now. But what would you ask her?
I don't think I would ask her much about the hijacking. I would be more curious about her thoughts post hijacking. Like, when you went home, what did you think of this? Did you think this would be solved? Did you think he would be arrested?
Yeah.
And then 5 years later, did you think he would still be asked about this? Did you think he would be arrested? Okay, let's fast forward 25 years. Did you think you would still be harassed about this? And I think it's so interesting because I chose to be involved in this DB Cooper thing.
Right.
1,000,000%. I chose it. I sought this out. I continue to do this. It's my choice. Tina Mucklow did not choose to be involved in this in any way. And her role, she's such a badass in doing this. Like, not only did she see her friend kind of like scared and frustrated and kind of losing it, but she chose to step in.
Yeah.
She could have like been like, whoa, good luck with that, Flo. This is scary.
Yeah, he pulled the short straw.
But instead she was like, oh, it's okay. I got this. And we always talk about Cooper being calm, cool, and collected, but how much of that is because of Tina Mucklow?
Right, yeah.
Being able to handle the situation. So not only did Cooper have this ability, but he got so lucky in getting Tina Mucklow because he could have got the same stewardess that spiked Paul Sini's drink.
Yeah.
And then now he's sitting next to a gal who's like, hey, you want one more bourbon and soda? I made this special for you. And then he drinks that and he's like, oh, shit, I can't jump out of a plane now.
Yeah, yeah. Did he drink anything while he was on the plane?
He did. He probably had 2 drinks, but it's debated on whether or not he spilled the first. I think it's more than likely he did. But I'm not sure, like, how did he spill the whole thing? What is a spill? I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Bourbon and soda, we've sort of tried to figure out exactly what the bourbon was. Just
that's what I love
for
about
funsies,
this community, yeah.
When you look at it, it's more than likely some well version of bourbon on an airplane.
Yeah, I mean, it's the airlines.
Yeah, you're getting a generic drink.
Get you a clue out of that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, interesting. Well, it reminds me in a lot of ways of the Jack the Ripper case, just because there's so many suspects, and it's just such a dearth of physical evidence that we can really get our hands on. It's a remarkable case. Do you think you'll see it ever solved? You're a young guy, so do you think you got several decades ahead of you? You think you'll ever see it solved, or you think, like, when you're an old man, you're going to be like, shit, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of D.B. Cooper. This is crazy. They never solved it.
I really hope that doesn't happen. I want it to be solved so badly, but I have one big problem with that. More than anything, I want to know what happened when his boots hit the ground,
right?
Where he was, and what his next move was.
Yeah.
I would love to know the planning and the motive and all that also. But more than anything, I want to know when his boots hit the ground, what was he thinking? Where was he? What was he going to do? Did he have this all planned out? Did he have an accomplice? Was he getting to a payphone to call his buddy Tom?
Right.
But because we're 53 years after the fact now, and Cooper is believed to be in his mid to late 40s, and we know he was a decently heavy smoker and obviously a daredevil.
Yeah.
40-year-old smokers and daredevils in 1971, they are not around anymore. Exactly, they are all dead. So at the very least, Cooper would be 90. And the 90-year-olds that are around weren't smoking and drinking and doing skydiving in 1971.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I had a guest on a long time ago who was an Elvis death hoax proponent. And I said, I'm like, dude, if you do the math, we're getting to the point now where regardless of whether he died in the 70s or he faked his death, at some point, Elvis is going to fucking be dead, dude. Like, he's not going to be 120 years old. So, yeah, the same really can apply to D.B. Cooper, where the chances are it's more likely than not that he's dead.
So if we are able to figure this out, here's my worst nightmare. My worst nightmare is that there is some sort of advancement or some sort of insane discovery, and we're like, all right, we figured it out. It was Tony Clifton. Tony Clifton was D.B. Cooper, and he lived in Winlock, Washington, and he died in 1992. And there are little to no records about this guy.
Right.
And you could pretty much guarantee he didn't run his mouth, because if he did, the case would already be solved.
Yeah.
So now I know who did it, but I don't get to know the planning. I don't get to know the motive, and I don't get to know what happened when his boots hit the ground, where he was, and what he did. I would rather this case be unsolved than for it to be solved that way. But unfortunately, I think that's most likely.
I can almost guarantee you that's what's going to happen if it's solved, because I have witnessed this phenomenon with many true crime cases. Thinking about the Eron's Golden State Killer case they solved a few years ago, this recent Delphi one. You get the name, the Forrest Fenn treasure. It's like the guy found the Forrest Fenn treasure, and there's so many details that you'd never find out the answers to the myriad of other questions. You just get the name and you maybe get a little background, but you don't get any of the fucking details. And it's maddening. And I've watched the communities, these communities like the DB Cooper research community, and it really kind of tears them asunder because they become like lost in the wilderness. And it's there because it's been solved, but they still don't know any of the answers to all of the other questions. So, yeah, personally, I kind of agree with you in a sense. It would be cool if this just doesn't get solved, if we're only going to get the bare bones information on how it all went down, which seems unlikely as it is.
You know, Forrest Fenn is a DB Cooper suspect, right?
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I'm a huge Forrest Fenn fan.
There's a book by Stephanie 30acre and another gal. I'm so sorry I couldn't remember their name. But they wrote a book together. Could DB Cooper be Forrest Fenn?
Wow.
Or could Forrest Fenn be DB Cooper?
I might have to look that one up.
I can't see the book.
Interesting.
It's,
all right, that's enough.
It's semi-fictional, and they just proposed the theory, but then after that, a bunch of the Forrest Fenn people started trying to connect that ridiculous Ha 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 book I told you about.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about
Forrest
that.
Fenn.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't make sense. It's sort of unrealistic. Forrest Fenn doesn't make a good DB Cooper suspect, in my opinion, but it's just another interesting thing. I mean, right. E. Howard Hunt has been floated as a DB Cooper suspect.
Has anyone, this is like a kind of a ridiculous question, but I've seen this in the true crime group. Has anyone tried to connect this to the Zodiac Killer somehow? Because there's always someone who tries to tie it to the Zodiac Killer. The poor Zodiac Killer, he gets implicated in everything. And it's like, he's just the Zodiac Killer. He's an evil man on his own. We don't need to make him DB Cooper and also Forrest Fenn and also, some other random thing. We don't need to connect him, the Eron's guy. That's what they were trying to do. He's also the Zodiac Killer. It's like, just be satisfied with what you get. But has anyone done it? I'm sure someone has.
Okay, first of all, I totally agree with your assessment right there. And yeah, 1,000,000%. I've done probably 5 episodes on their suspect was the Zodiac Killer and DB Cooper. I had John Cameron on my show, who his suspect is Ed Edwards. Ed Edwards is DB Cooper, the Zodiac Killer, the Atlanta child killer. He killed John Benet Ramsey and Teresa Hallback.
Oh, my God.
And then I also did Dr. David Gold on my show. He believes DB Cooper was, Frank Morris that escaped from Alcatraz and the Anglin brothers. So Frank Morris is DB Cooper. He is also the Zodiac Killer. And he told me during the show that the 3 of them combined have killed 20,000 people.
Oh, dear.
And then I had Harriet Suchet. Can't remember. I'm sorry, Harriet, on my show. And she believed that Jack Torrance is DB Cooper and the Zodiac Killer. Oh, and then I did one more that was, the gal's name. I can't remember her name. I'm sorry.
Well, when you've done
her dad was the Atlanta child killer, the Zodiac, and DB Cooper.
Wow, that's wild. I'm satisfied I'm proud of myself for connecting the Zodiac, because I knew.
And I was so upset about those. I was so upset about those episodes because I started to get mail like, "Hey, these have nothing to do." I thought your show was serious, and now you're putting these people on, and it's not a serious show. Because even when I have someone on who is not that as serious as someone else, maybe they're a wacko, maybe not. Yeah. I treat them as if they're as serious as anyone else, and I'm going to let them present their best case. And like I said, you as the audience can decide who's right, who's wrong, and who's crazy.
That's how we've been running it at Binnall of America for years. Yeah.
I was so upset about all of this criticism that I was like, I want to have a couple of Zodiac experts on the show to tell me that DB Cooper and the Zodiac are not the same person. Which I already knew, but I just, for the show, I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So I had this great guy, James, on the show, and then Chris Cunningham knows a lot about the Zodiac, and Drew Beeson as well.
Yeah.
And anyone who's serious about the Zodiac, you can ask them, like, is Zodiac DB Cooper? Of course not. The Zodiac hurt people and didn't take anything. Cooper took something and made sure not to hurt anyone. Wildly different crimes.
Exactly. Now, I had one more question, one more Cooper-centric question, then into the what's coming up for you. But you've mentioned the Ha 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 book a couple times. What is this? This sounds like, you talk about the Zodiac. That's why it almost makes me think about it like someone wrote a book pretending that they were claiming they were DB Cooper.
Yeah, there is a really great story behind that. And I'm going to take full credit for this. So I don't investigate DB Cooper. I'm not like trying to solve the case myself.
Right.
I would consider myself like more of a journalist embedded in this community.
Yeah, you're a Cooper observer.
Yes, I absolutely love it. But there was this Ha 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 book it's called Ha 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 by DB Cooper. And it sort of leads to this magical treasure hunt, sort of a la Forrest Fenn, where there is 200,000 or there's like a certificate hidden somewhere that's good for $200,000. And there were all these clues in the book once you figure it out. And there's a bunch of like random ass words that are in bold in the book and random letters that are in bold. And so it's always sort of been this mystery, like, where did this book come from and who really wrote it? Nobody has ever considered it like this could lead to who DB Cooper was. The facts are wildly wrong. The story's fictional. It's clearly just somebody made this up.
Yeah, it's like a weird side quest for the Cooper.
Yeah, but it was unknown. And because it was so off base on what we really knew happened, nobody really cared about it. But I sort of was like, well, if the person who wrote this is still alive, then I want to have them on the show.
Yeah, of
to
course.
Talk about it. So I went on this crazy, like, I got to figure this out. There's a publisher on the book, and I'll figure that out and go through this. And so I looked up the publisher and who that went to and who this went to, and it gave me this other information and this name, and I got in contact with them, and they told me sort of a wild story. And this is like 2020.
Yeah.
I looked into it real hard, and I sort of got to the stopping point where it seemed like the people who were peripherally involved in this didn't want to talk about it anymore.
Weird.
Which was weird.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get any farther, so I just left it alone.
Interesting.
And then, like 6 months later, I get a phone call, and it's this gal who worked for the lady who was in charge of the publisher. She was like an assistant to this independent publisher. Mm-hmm. And she told me this wild ass story about the guy who wrote it was a murderer and he's in jail, and there was this dispute because the publisher didn't get paid, and so they didn't release a bunch of the books.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's so crazy. And the not releasing the books thing made sense to me because when I got my copy of the book, Brian Woodruff, who was he inherited the Ariel store, he gave it to me out of a box of what was probably like 500 more of these books.
Oh, wow.
And so I just knew right away, like, first of all, this book's not rare and it's not valuable because it has nothing really to do with this case. And so when she called me, she told me also, hey, I have like 1,000 more of these books.
Holy shit.
And what I want you to do is to buy them from me, and then you can sell them because they're valuable. And my first thought was, if I have 1,000 of them, they're not valuable.
Right.
And because could I sell 10 of them? Absolutely. I could sell 10 at a premium. Can I sell 100? Probably not. And at 100, I'm selling them for $10.
Right.
And I'm not mailing books out for $10.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely not buying 1,000 books out. And so I got off the phone with her and she gave me the name of the guy who wrote it. But she gave me the wrong name. But she gave me a version of his name that was close enough that when I misspelled it on purpose to try and find him online, it led me to this incredible website that was made in like 1996, like a GeoCities website, to promote this book called Plague of Justice. Now, I'd been in the DB Cooper community for 7 or 8 years at this point. I knew everything. I've read every book that had the word DB Cooper in it. I have alerts set on Google so that if anything DB Cooper pops up, I know about it right away. Mm-hmm. Tim, I'm on top of it.
Yeah, dude, this is why I wanted to get you on the show. You are, from what I could gather, looking into this, I'm like, Darren Shaefer's the preeminent DB Cooper guy. He knows everything and everybody. So this is the guy we want to get on to talk about it. All right.
So I stumble across this website that's to promote this book. And then there was also a 60 Minutes special about this guy, Stan Terrell. So I read what's on his website and I'm blown away. I'm like, I have to read this book immediately. How have I not heard of this? This is insane. There is a chapter called DB Cooper in this book.
Oh, wow.
And I have not read it. And are you ready for the story of this book? Because it is wild.
Okay.
So you have this guy, Rod Addix is his name, which would be the perfect name for a gay porn star, but that's his real name. It's Rod Addix.
Okay.
And so Rod Addix is living in Portland doing tax work for a pretty large, very successful tax firm that does business taxes. And that wouldn't be you or me. They'd be doing businesses. They'd be doing taxes for larger businesses.
Okay. Now, this is the guy with the website that you're talking about, right? Or is this the story that you told?
This is the story.
Okay. So he wrote a story, and this is
so Rod Addix started writing this story, this DB Cooper story to get out. It'd be cool. It'd be fun, whatever. It's super harmless. But then Rod Addix murders his boss, Stan Terrell's father. And Stan Terrell's father created this tax business. He was, I don't know if Rod Addix was a partner or if he was like his number 2 guy.
Yeah.
But Rod's idea is, hey, I murder this guy, I take over this tax business.
Right.
No problem. The guy he murders has like cerebral palsy and is on crutches.
Oh, God.
He pushes him down the stairs to kill him.
Yeah.
Does not die.
Oh, shit.
And so at the bottom of the stairs, he grabs one of his crutches from him and beats him to death with his own crutch.
Oh, my God.
So after that, he disappears, and then there's this murder investigation. They quickly land on Rod Addix being like the number 2 guy in this guy's business. Of course, it's him. They investigate him. They arrest him. It's him. And then Stan Terrell, the guy's son, opens up his desk at work. And in his desk at work is this script for this book. And he reads it, and he's like, holy shit, is this guy DB Cooper also? Like, that's insane. And so he turns the script over to the police. The police look at it. I assume it goes to the FBI really quickly. They're like, this has nothing to do with Cooper. This is a fictional story this guy wrote. It's not anything.
Yeah.
Years go by. This Ha 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 book comes out. Stan Terrell gets wind of it, takes a peek at it, and it is the exact same story that he had read from Rod Addix's desk that was unfinished. He finished it in prison, swindled an independent publisher with his then girlfriend into publishing this book that they were hoping that they raised $200,000. I mean, this is all maybe. So let's say the book does $1 million in sales, then they can pay for that treasure hunt out of that $1 million in sales. So not only was there never any treasure hunt at all, but the publisher was never paid for the book. And so it had an insanely limited release.
Yeah.
Only a handful of books ever got into circulation before they were like, we're not going to sell your book if you're not going to pay us for publishing it.
Right, right.
And so that sort of triggered this scarcity of the book, when I know for a fact that there are boxes of this book that are out there that don't mean anything. If there are only 25 of these books, then yes, obviously it's super rare and valuable. With my own eyes, I've seen at least 100.
Wow.
And I spoke to a lady on the phone that said she had like 1,000.
Oh my God. What a wild story, dude. That is, yeah.
But then the Forest Fen people started to like really pursue it. And I think that's what, when I say I saw one of the books sell for like $400, it's Forest Fen people that bought that book. Not
well, like I said, they're wandering in the wilderness now that the treasure's been found. So they, they need to find a new obsession. So you got, well, Cooper Vortex, of course. People can find that, coopervortex.podbean.com, or just punch in Cooper Vortex podcast. You'll find it. I'm really blown away, dude, by what you've done here with this show. It's really cool. And like I said, when I was looking for the guest, for the DB Cooper guest, I'm like, this guy's the guy, because he's a specialist on the DB Cooper case and has talked to so many people involved in this research community. So, I mean, hats off to you, dude. It's remarkable. Like I said, it started out like almost 20 years ago, and it was like over time it became like this. People had just these singular shows about like the JFK assassination or 9/11 or stuff like that, and to see one on DB Cooper is just so awesome, because it's really, that community has just grown so much in the last few years. And I'm hopeful, not to take away from the DB Cooper thing, I want the Yuba County 5 case to develop into this kind of community too, because it needs that kind of attention. But I'm really fascinated by the community and the work that you're doing, documenting this community, man. I'm telling you, it's priceless stuff. It really is. I've tried to sort of adhere to that with the Binnall of America spirit, just documenting the different people in these different communities, because down the line, that's such invaluable information that you're collecting by way of the Cooper Vortex.
Oh, I think so. I mean, there's people on my show that have passed away, and the idea that I can give you a 2.5-hour interview with all of their thoughts on this case and everything they know, I think that's super valuable. I mean, there's at least 50 other people in this world that would agree with me about that.
And talk about CooperCon. This is coming up. You're going to be the MC for this. This is November 15th to the 17th. I believe it's in Seattle at Flight Museum, I think.
Yes, the Seattle Museum of Flight, which is super badass because Boeing's right there, so they get a bunch of funding and toys from Boeing. So it's probably if you're an aviation nerd, it's probably one of the best museums for that in the United States. And your ticket to CooperCon includes museum admission as well. So it's November 15th through the 17th in Seattle at the Museum of Flight. If you're a DB Cooper nerd, all of the names you're familiar with will be there, including myself. But for anyone that's in one of these weird, like, niche communities, if I go to work tomorrow and talk about DB Cooper, no one wants to listen. No one wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
But going to CooperCon, it's 100 people, 200 people that only want to talk about this one crazy thing that I love.
Right.
And it's just so great. Like, some of these names I'm arguing with online all the time are there, got to hang out with Drew Beeson. It's just
like a family reunion.
It is a family reunion because we're all talking shit to each other all the time, but we're in different places.
Yeah. No, it's I know exactly what you're talking about, that sense of community and being free to discuss the weird case that you're into. It applies to all these different things. You go to a UFO event, a Bigfoot event, especially. I go to the Bigfoot. People are so happy to be able to just talk about Bigfoot because their family's probably sick of hearing them talk about Bigfoot. So they're like, enough with the Bigfoot, dude. So when they get to the event, they're like, they're in heaven. So I don't know about this year, but when I was looking into your stuff, I was like, I might want to swing this CooperCon. So I don't know. I hope it seems like it's going well. So I'm hoping they'll do another one next year. Because
it just changed hands. So CooperCon was ran by somebody else for a while and didn't go so well. And the community has sort of taken it over.
That's great.
And the people that are leading that charge now are all like, we're going to make this transparent. We're going to make this the best event.
Right.
And there's a wide range of people in the DB Cooper community. Like I said, there are true crime people and there are aviation and skydiving people. There are people obsessed with DB Cooper that own several planes. There are people that are obsessed with DB Cooper that can barely pay their bills.
Right.
And there's a wide variety of people in there. And I really think the right people are now in charge of CooperCon. And I'm really, really excited about that.
Now you're like,
it's now going to be like by the community for the community.
Yeah, this sounds awesome. So I'm going to wind up at CooperCon either this year or next year because I want to get embedded into this community and talk to more folks. So that's CooperCon. That's dbcooperevents.com where people can find out more about it. It's November 15th to the 17th in Seattle. A conference devoted entirely to DB Cooper. I can't even imagine. And it's like 3 days. It's going to be, it sounds comprehensive. So.
Absolutely. The last few times, I love DB Cooper. The last few times I've like flown home from CooperCon, I'm like on the plane thinking to myself, I need a break from DB Cooper.
Well, I'll give you a break now because we're wrapping up the show. Darren, I can't thank you enough, dude, just for laying out so much information for us, being patient with me when I ask either questions you've heard a million times or completely insane questions. I really do appreciate it. Like I said, as I sat down tonight to talk, I felt like I had a 5-course feast ahead of me. And I was just so excited about digging into this case from all these different angles. And I really do appreciate you just going on this ride with us tonight. I have had an absolute blast. I hope folks check out the Cooper Vortex. That's the podcast. CooperCon, that's in November in Seattle. And you've got a fan, man. You've got a fan in me. And I think you're going to have a lot of fans from the BOA audience as well, because you're doing some awesome work, brother.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I had a great time. I love talking Cooper.
I can tell, man. I can tell. It's an awesome, awesome case. And I'm glad we finally got to showcase it here on Binnall America the way it deserves. So have a great night, brother.
All right. Thanks, you too.